You will turn back in your Bibles to the book of Genesis, whatever form you have of the copy of God's Word. Let's begin to look at least one installment. We have a part one in our heading, so that means we will have a part two. I hope to be done with the part two, but there is quite a bit in this account that Jude calls an example, a tupos, a pattern, a model. That's what Jude calls it. The whole event here is a model. What a model is an opportunity to look at something on the outside of you that speaks to something that's around you or in you. We call it a paradigm. A paradigm. That's what a lot of our scriptures are about. They're paradigms. They are historical events with eternal truths to be derived from them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the Word of God. And no less is this account before us. We are in the middle of a story that did not begin with Lot. The account in Genesis 13 through 19 is what we might call a parenthetical. There he goes again with big words. It's a parenthetical. And a parenthetical is kind of a pause from a previous line of thought with an insertion of an idea that can really stand on its own if you separated it from the previous line of thought. You continue with that previous line of thought, and that line of thought is not broken. Does that make some sense? So what we have here is a parenthetical of an individual for whom the matters that are before him didn't start with him. And by the way, you and I are parentheticals as well. Nothing started with you, and nothing starts with us, certainly in the matters of salvation. Salvation has been going on from the beginning of time, and you and I have been swept up in the river flow of it. You've heard me use that terminology years ago. You and I just got caught on the banks, and something more powerful than us swept us into that river, and we're riding down that river as a parenthetical story. A parenthetical story. That's what we are, because this is really about God and his redemptive plan in Christ for sinners. But what Lot is going to serve for you and me is a kind of alternative view of a privilege granted which is not properly understood. An alternative view of a privilege granted that is not properly understood. You see, our friend Lot is really riding on the waves of the blessings of another man. He's riding on the waves of the blessings of another man. And there are a lot of lessons to learn with that one as well. What Lot is doing is experiencing the call not of himself, but of Abraham. That started back in Genesis 12. And the call of Abraham in some surreptitious ways, some what we would call redemptively mysterious way, includes Lot in its call. And so we've got to learn a little bit of something about Lot. And it's going to take a couple weeks, because Lot becomes a model for us about how society will go wrong. It will go wrong when it fails to give glory to the God that blessed it. That's what Lot is going to teach us today, how a society will go wrong when it fails to give God the glory for what it has. Lot is an account that goes into the New Testament as you and I know it, and it really describes a believer who ends up in a horrific mess. Now, I know none of y'all know nothing about that kind of scenario. So this is completely new and foreign to you. Put up with me for an hour. How a believer really gets in trouble when they make wrong choices. That's what's in front of us. That's the essence of what we're dealing with when it comes to the opportunity to actually seize an event in a way in which it could actually immensely advance your blessing, but because of wrong choice making, your blessings are diminished. Again, most of y'all don't know what that's like. The title of our message today, Arise, Move, and Go. Lot Mercy is knocking at your door, boy. Mercy's knocking at your door. In fact, mercy's been knocking at your door, Lot, for a long time. You keep making the wrong decision, Lot. That's the title of our message today. So really, Genesis 19 verses 1 through 17 will be the opening, kind of centering in on this brother Lot. And then we'll pick up next week and really get into the details, because the historical context is much more prophetic of what's going on today. I'll touch on some of that as we go. Proposition number 1, wrong choice making by Lot. What do I mean by that? This 19th chapter cannot be understood without the 13th chapter. So we go back to the 13th chapter, and we understand in the 13th chapter, we're going to be starting at the 10th verse, but I'm going to run you up to it. Lot's been called out with his uncle Abraham, who is Abraham at that time, and Lot and Abraham are making their way to the promised land. In fact, they've made it to the promised land. They've made it to the promised land. They haven't settled yet, but they've made it to the promised land. For those of you who don't know, that's about an 800-mile journey from the south, because Abraham is coming from Ur of the Chaldees, from Babylon. He makes 2 major stops, and this particular stop that he's at right now is a stop that's forced upon him, because as he's making his excursion from Ur of the Chaldees into the promised land, God is actually blessing Abraham even more abundantly, because Abraham has stock, cattle, herds, in addition to it, much silver and gold. And therefore, Abraham's entourage is huge. And what that means, because you are walking from Ur of Chaldee, you have to be strategic as to how to provide for and care for your goods. We could imagine coming from Ur of the Chaldees, fundamentally walking, that they would have had to have a route where there was water and where there was plenty of foliage for their animals to eat. There would have had to be towns where Abraham could have negotiated with people about provisions for him, his family, his goods. Look at this in a more contemporary way. When God is calling you into his purpose, he will give you resources in order to get that purpose done. And when you walk with him properly in that purpose, he will expand your resources in order to get the job done. Most important is making sure that when God calls you, that you take the journey according to God's will. He will always supply all your needs according to his riches in Christ. Now, y'all shout about all that. What I'm saying to you is be careful, because the goal is really not about the journey nor the process. The goal is about the destiny. And this is what we're getting ready to learn. The parenthetical is going to teach you that a man, on the one hand, understood this is about destiny. And then somebody else is saying, man, this is about process. One man is clear on the destiny being the promises of God, that he would be heir of the world. Another man is saying, man, look how much money we making on this journey. Look how much money we're making on this journey. Because the scriptures are clear that Lot was being abundantly blessed right along with Abraham. Let's take a little bit of a look at it. Genesis 13, verse 10. Genesis 13, 10. And the way that the author would have us to understand this is over in verse 1 through 3. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot what? With him into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai. That's what we would say, Hai, or actually Ai. And actually, I wish I had a map, because what you would see is that Abraham has been here before. He succumbed to the famine that was in the land. This was a natural famine. It's not synthetic like we're dealing with today. He succumbed to a famine, and he went down to Egypt for a while, him and Lot, to preserve their goods. We get that. He had to preserve his animals. And he came up out of that. It was a kind of small excursion. He goes back to the place where God told him to go. And when he got there, he worshiped God. See, the thing about Abraham that you must know is that Abraham largely kept his eyes on the promise. And every time God advanced him, wherever God stopped him, he worshiped God right there. So we're at a point of worship for Abraham, but we're at a point of warfare for Lot. So here's how this works out. If you look over at verse 4, it will tell us, verse 5, just start at verse 5. Verse 4 affirms my point of worship with Abraham. And Lot also, which, once again, what? Went with Abraham. See, he's just hanging out. God didn't call Lot. Don't get me wrong, he's saved, we know that. But God didn't call him. He's an addendum to a story that belongs to God and Abraham. This is way bigger than Lot. But he doesn't think so. Because he's a young, foolish man, inclined to passions that we're about to get into, that some of us should know. It tells us over in verse 5, and Lot also, which went with Abraham, had what? Flocks and herds and tents. Now we have what is called the strife of the flesh. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together. See it? For their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. I'm listening to the narrator. You're listening to him? The narrator is saying sometimes material blessing will bring conflict between brethren. I'm listening to him. Are you listening to him? Sometimes your expansion is more in your head than in your heart. Are you listening to him? And so Lot's head is swelling up. And what's happening is ain't no room in the tent for him and Abraham. And Abraham's getting squeezed and trying to figure out how to deal with his nephew. Abraham's the big dog, not Lot. But see, this challenge goes on with you and me because you and I have to admit that we are both Abraham and Lot at the same time. And so here's how the text unpacks. Verse 7, and there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelt in the land. You guys see that? Now, Lot had no problem with the strife. See, because proud men, carnal men, fleshly men, we are taught, according to Romans 8 and James chapter 4, carnal men love conflict. It's a fleshly thing to fight. That's what the Bible says. So when you're carnal, you look for strife and contention because you're operating under the tenets of the devil. And wherever the devil is, there's confusion and strife all the time. And the Bible tells us the nature of the flesh is to be striving and fighting and demanding and wanting and taking. And so Lot's herdsmen are in this conflict. Lot's not doing anything about it. But Abraham is a bigger man than Lot and the others. Because what Abraham knew was the lost were watching. Isn't that what the text said? The Canaanites and the Perizzites were in the land, and what that means is here comes some religious folk, church folk, come up into our town, and when they come up in there, they're acting a fool. See, that's why I don't go to church. You know, you hear it, right? Because church folk are horrible for being myopic. That is, actually thinking the world revolves around them and that nobody's watching. The unbeliever's watching you. The unbeliever, certainly when you raise your banner and talking about, I'm coming in the name of the Lord Jesus. The unbeliever's watching you. And I love Abraham because he's walking in what we would call social intelligence. He's very much aware of his environment. And he says, no, we're going to stop this before it gets started. We're not getting ready to start the church of the Baptists and the Pentecostals and the rest. We won't be fighting. We have a history of it in the church, going all the way back to the patristic fathers. Do you know that? The history of the church are church wars from the apostolic fathers up to this very hour. When you read history, we always fighting. You do not see the unity that is in Christ manifesting itself in love and wisdom and in harmony and in integration. We're always fighting. Somebody else called my attention to this note as well. There is no greater false prophet in the world than the church. The church has historically been the constant false prophet to the world. The church has constantly said things about what God is up to and what God's going to do, and God's coming in 5 minutes, and they've been wrong every time. And so Brother Abraham is saying, look, You go your way, I go my way. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord call. All that because he was a man of peace. But more or less, here's the point that I want you to get. He was not enamored by the process. He was clear about the promise. Abraham understood the goal is destiny. The goal is not engaging in the process and seeing how much you can milk the process. The goal is the finish line. I've told you that before, right? You run a race, but you're not crowned until you finish crossing that yellow tape. And so the difference between Abraham and Lot here is that Abraham is willing to concede. Isn't that humble? He's willing to concede property, territory, land to Lot. And here's the problem. Lot helps you and me understand the ignorance of carnal thinking, wrong choice making. Look over at verse 10. And Lot lifted up his eyes and he beheld all the plains of Jordan. Do you see it? Now, if you could visualize the map of Israel, what you would visualize is that Abraham and Lot are in the center, actually moving more south toward the bottom portions of Israel, but kind of in the center because they're at Ai or near Bethel, which would be near Hebron. It's the city of David. And they're looking east, west, north, and south. And Lot looks over to the east. And in the east-south, that would be like kind of going to San Diego, but pushing further east, okay? That's how it would be. Now, the reality is that the territory that God was giving Abraham did not include this area into which Lot is looking, because God had designated that area for destruction. But see, the door was open for choice making because Abraham said, Lot, whichever way you want to go. Now, you and I know that the preparation of the heart in man and the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. You and I know that man will devise his way, but God will just direct his steps. You know that. You and I know that there's no accidents with God. This is also why, if you're going to take notes, when you make choices and you constantly make the same kind of choices, those choices are indicators of your character and nature. When you make choices and you constantly make the same qualitatively distinct choices, the quality of your choices, they become indicators of your person. They don't have to define you permanently, but they will certainly define you in the moment. Am I making some sense? When you make choices, they will be indicators of your bent and propensity, at least at that moment. Because I've talked to you about identity. It's a very complex thing. It's malleable in a lot of ways. You have a core identity, and you need to obey that. But all of this flexible stuff that we call phenotypical expression has a lot to do with you exporting your identity to different communities and different groups because you're trying to get something out of it because you are deficient in your confidence in who you are all by yourself. Am I making some sense? Well, Lot knows who he is. Lot's a man that's trying to become a billionaire. That's what he is. Look at the language and see if I'm giving you some good advice. He lifted up his eyes and behold all the plains of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. That it was well watered everywhere. I won't be dealing with a famine like we did, which sent me and Uncle Abraham down to Egypt. It was well watered everywhere. Y'all got that? That's the first thing. Secondly, it says here, not only was it well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. There's a hiccup here. There's a glitch in the contract. You're getting ready to buy some property, but what you don't know is that property is under condemnation by the city. It was a little fine print that you missed. Some little fine print that you missed because you're so gung-ho for this territory. And so it says, even as the garden of the Lord. Do you see that? So now what is the text doing? Taking us all the way back to the garden. That pristine arena where it was flawless and the ecology was perfect. Going back to the garden, you know about the garden, do you? No, you don't. You should. No, yes, no, yes. You don't. And we're not going there today, but the garden is a complex historical site with a grander metaphorical picture of the perfect ecological conditions of society for man in his sinless condition, where him and God could dwell together without any kind of mediation. It was a perfect vertical relationship, a perfect horizontal relationship, a perfect domain where everything is in order because God was the one that put it there, and all he needed men to do was to till it and keep it, and he would be blessed forever. That's what Lot is looking at. That's what Lot is looking at. That's what the text is teaching us. You see that? But what Lot is looking at is a strong delusion. It's a mirage. It's a superficial front. Behind that beach front is rot. Because what Lot is buying into is the domain and the territory for business purposes. He's failing to consider the politics. He's not going to a land where there are no people there. He got to now engage with the citizenry, the council, the chamber of commerce, the mayors and governors, and the people. So the political, sociological conditions are one thing, even though the geological and geographical and what we call topographical conditions are another. Am I making some sense? It's like when you're going to buy a house in another city and you're not even regarding what kind of people are in that city, you're getting ready to create a big mess for yourselves. Am I making some sense? So Lot is completely wrapped up in a problem, in my opinion. And the problem is this. Lot is actually pushing the envelope. He's coming to the parameters of the domain that God is giving him, and he wants to go outside of those parameters because it looks so good. What good is it to live in a territory that looks good when it's outside of the will of God? Trying to lay a foundation down just before we go, because I told you this is a parenthetical. Notice what verse 11 says. Verse 11 says, in Genesis 13, then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves from one another. You got that? Lot was happy. Abraham was sad. Because Abraham was relationship oriented, and Lot was wealth oriented. Abraham was sad, and you and I will know this next week, because Abraham has to pray for this boy. This boy gets into a lot of trouble, and Abraham has to show up to help him. Abraham's sad because Abraham is the one that wanted to include Lot into God's call for his life. But that wasn't God's purpose. Am I making some sense? Lot has to operate on his own grounds. He comes in under the auspices of Abraham. But Abraham said back in chapter 12, Abraham, just you and your house. Just you and your house. Not your cousins. Even if they're kissing cousins, they can't come. Not your cousins. Pray for them. I can take care of them where they are. Lot, Abraham, just you and Sarah and your servants. See, but Abraham had this love for this boy because he had lost his dad early. That was Abraham's brother. So Lot is riding on a ticket that really doesn't pertain to him. That's what our text will clearly teach us. Look over again at verse 11. Lot chose him all the plains, and Lot journeyed east and separated themselves one from the other. And Abraham dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plains, pitched his tent towards Sodom. Here it is. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. I'll pick that up next week. That is not our emphasis today. What will be our emphasis before we move on to our next point is, look at verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abraham, after that Lot was separated from him. See, God was pleased with the separation because God had a purpose with his servant Abraham. After Abraham is going through all the squabbles and everything with his little nephew, and God's not talking about it at all. You don't hear God in any of this. God shows up as Abraham is wiping the tears from his eyes because his little nephew is headed to San Francisco 49er country. And then God whispers to Abraham, Abraham, chill, dude. You and I are still on point. Chill, dude. We're still on point. Did y'all hear what I just stated? Abraham chill. He's talking. See, when you're in a situation where difficult choices have to be made, you really want to hear from God before you make those choices. You want to hear from God while you're making those choices. But even if you make choices before you hear from God, I want to hear from God after I make the choice. Because I might still be able to course correct. If I made a mistake, Lord, help me. You should be smart enough to know how to pray for that. Lord, talk to me if this decision was rooted in my flesh. Because he's not talking to Lot at all. Lot's not hearing from God at all. Point number one, wrong choice making by Lot brings us to two propositions. One is a choice is a what? A choice is always a seed that you sow. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 and 8. Never forget that. We are always sowing seeds, ladies and gentlemen. Every decision we make is affecting our environment, affecting our resources, affecting our relationships, affecting us mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Every decision we make. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also what? That is the reciprocity of choice making. That is the reciprocity of choice making. And this is why God tells you and me to be two things: humble and also wise. And in order to be wise, you got to ask God for help. If any man lacks wisdom, let him do what? God help me, because I know if I sow a bad seed, I'm going to have consequences that are not going to be good. See, now I know a few people, raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. A few people do. The rest of y'all, I don't know where y'all been in your life. A lot of us are living with the consequences of wrong choices right now. And so what we're dealing with our brother Lot is that he is not remembering that if he does not regard the seed that he's about to sow, when the harvest comes, that seed is going to bear forth the fruit of its own nature. And that's what we're looking at right now in our account. Verse 8, Galatians 6, 8. For he that soweth to the what? Now, I want you to get it. Abraham was sowing to the spirit, and Lot was sowing to the flesh. Abraham was sowing to destiny predicated upon promise given to him in prophecy in the person of God, and he was doing it by faith. He was trusting God, and Lot was operating out of the things seen, not the things unseen. And Lot moved towards the perimeters, the edge. Lot was at the edge. He was at the hedge, and he broke the hedge. And whenever you break the hedge, you will be bitten by the serpent. Lot is about to be bit by the serpent for pushing the envelope. Am I making some sense? That's exactly what's going on in our text. So point B, Lot chose the what? He chose the flesh. Y'all got that? He looked up and he looked out and he saw way down the road. In fact, what's interesting about this, I got you for a little while. What's interesting here, and this is just historiography right now, the land of Canaan wasn't plush territory all throughout its region. That's one of the wild things about Canaan, the promised land. It would be by the time the 12 tribes are moving into it, but right now it's a lot of open space that really needs a lot of development. But that's often what God does with you and me. He gives us a promise that requires development when we get on the inside of it, because he's teaching us to walk by faith and not by sight. And he's teaching us to see things the way he sees them before they show up. So that Abraham knew how to wait on the Lord in the midst of the land, even though it was going to have some real instability ecologically. Remember, Abraham's going to deal with 2 famines at least. Israel's always dealing with famine. Now, God is the God of the supernatural, and he can fix ecological conditions anytime he wants to. And he will bless that land over time to let Israel know if they obey him, he will cause the heavens to open up and pour down waters, and foliage will occur and trees will occur with fruits and vines. Every man will be living in the abundance of what we call eschatologically his own vine tree and his own fig tree. And we know that God can do that. Can God do that? Does anybody know that in the midst of a general famine, that God can bless you to where that famine doesn't even impact you? You should know that. See, like God is not inhibited by even the brokenness of his own geographical conditions. He's not limited. He can bless you in the little quarters in which you are. And God often does that, does he not? You'll see everybody around you struggling. And God has given you a line of water to satiate your little resources and keep feeding you in Jesus' name. And you know God has been good to you. You know he's been good to you, and you need to give him praise for it and honor him for that. All right, because that's the Bible. That is the Bible. The reason we go to hell is because we don't thank God enough for the blessings we have already. Right, and so this is what's going on with Abraham and Lot. Lot's pushing the envelope, and he's choosing the flesh. And Romans 8:13 reminds us of this. Romans 8:13 says this. I just want you to capture it. For if you live after the flesh, you shall what? And we're learning this in our Friday study as we're dealing with the works of Satan and how he has been given the power of death. Death is not merely first and finally physical death. Death is a process that starts with separation from God. Is that true? See, whenever you and I separate from God, you and I are going to walk in the diminishing qualities of life. And didn't I just say to you that Lot now is being separated from God? He's going his own way. And even as a believer, once you do that, Jesus says, without me, what? You can't do a thing. I'm talking to the believer today. Lots of believers just lock that on up. Okay, scratch your head, but he's a child of God. But what he's about to prove is that God is not a liar. When we sow to the flesh, we're going to reap of the flesh corruption, and we're going to reap of the flesh death. And Lot is going to start experiencing death in everything that he has. For if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, you shall what? I think that Lot, right at the moment in which Abraham said, man, you go your way, I'll go my way, would be cool. I think Lot should have said, where you go, I will go. Where your people are, they're going to be my people. Where you live, I'm going to live. Where you die, I'm going to die. Where you are buried, I'm going to be buried. The Lord see to it that he never separate me from you, because I know that I'm blessed for your sake. But he chose the flesh because he was ignorant of the grounds upon which he was there. All right, so here's another little lesson for you to learn. It's extremely important for you to learn this. Lot made the mistake of thinking that it was all about him. I told you in the beginning of the message that you and I don't start anything. You and I are coming in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a story, and sometimes in the middle of a blessing. And when you're in the middle of the blessing, you really need to know who is the primary person being blessed. Because you might just be there as a kind of addendum, an added blessing, but you need to make sure that you don't change the story, mess up the script. Again, what Lot is doing here is thinking that he can be the captain of his own destiny. He's thinking that he's free to carve out his own course. That's not true for Lot, and it's not true for you, and it's not true for me. We think we're free to make choices and do what we want to, but they always have what? Consequences. And that's what's going on with our dear brother Lot. Look at chapter 14, verse 1 and 2. Now, when Paul says watch out, because when you choose the flesh, death is going to occur. There are going to be variables of separation that take place in many dimensions. I'm getting ready to help you with one. This is how you and I know when we're walking in the flesh. Are you ready? We always are having trouble with somebody. And it's not rooted in God's righteousness. It's rooted in our presumption that we can go where we want to, do what we want to, how we want to, without asking the Lord to guide us in our steps and determine where we go is what God wants us to do. God made that clear to Israel. Remember what he said? If you obey me, I'll make everybody to be at peace with you. If you disobey me, I will make sure that everyone is a thorn in your side, pricks in your eyes, and every day you wake up, you got to fight somebody. And this is a picture of the struggle of the new man versus the old man. Is that true, child of God? I'm trying to make an application. One of the ways you know whether or not you're right with God is when, in the proportion of the conflict between the new nature and the old nature, you are able to manage that old nature. Am I teaching you guys that right now on Tuesday and Friday? It's managing. You're not eradicating the old nature. You're managing him. You're caging that fool. And you're doing a thesis on all of his diabolical methods by which he tries to hoodwink you and get you to do something that's contrary to your identity in Christ. You're getting your PhD in your carnality. Am I making some sense? Because that's called being mature in the faith. We got to know his wiles. We got to know his methods. We got to know his strategies. And you got to know how the flesh works. That's why Paul gave us Galatians chapter 5:16. The flesh lusts against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh. Going to always be the way. But when we're walking in the maturity of the Spirit of God, we will see God grant us the ability to contain our fallen nature. Contain it. Not subdue it. Contain it. Am I making some sense? Not subdue it. So that you are walking in the Spirit and not in the flesh. When you're walking in the flesh is ruling, and the outcome is going to be strife and war. Here it is. For the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. These are contrary to one another, so that you cannot easily do what you want to do. That's God's mercy, by the way. When he disrupts your life, when you're walking in a strong delusion, I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in a moment, because Lot was looking at something that was massively deceptive. Just like most of us are looking at a world and it's deceiving us. The world you live in is deceiving you right now. I'm letting you know that now. The vast majority of my Christian brothers and sisters are constantly being hoodwinked by optics, by images, by promises, by the assertion that this world is really well watered, almost like the Garden of Eden. I'm going to come back there. So Lot chose the flesh. So look with me at Genesis 14, 1, 2, and 12. Let's see what happens when Lot goes on down to the area of Sodom and Gomorrah and the regions round about. It came to pass in those days, Amraphel, king of Shinar, Ariah, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of the nations, that these made what? These made war with Bera, the king of who? And with Birsha, king of Gomorrah, and Shabna, king of Adma, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. These are all the cities around which Lot is hanging out. Hey, guess what happened? Lot bought some property on the outside of Sodom, about 10 minutes away, thinking that he could go in and do business and come out and hang out and play Christian. Yeah, he bought some property right on the outside of Sodom. That's what he did before he moved on the inside. Because that's what you do. You get close. And then when you think you can manage it, you then step on the inside. Am I making some sense? And so he had done that. But what was going on, he had been there for years now. I'm going to tell you the parentheses period between Lot going to Sodom and Gomorrah and God taking him out of Sodom and Gomorrah is almost 25 years. He goes in single. He comes out a widower. Because he gets married, he has 4 daughters. Not 2, 4. Y'all know that. And so that takes a little time. Doesn't it take some time? I mean, you know, in our day, no, you can get all that in about a year. But I'm just saying, it took some time. So what we're talking about is how sin will lead you closer to it. And you'll get right up on it, and then you'll think you can have authority over it. And the next thing you know, you're knee deep inside of it, only to find out it was designated for war by all the enemies round about. Now the economy is about to collapse completely. Because I've already told you, war produces famine. Famine is the collapse of economy, and that's what's getting ready to happen. Look at verse 3. Verse 3, 14:3. And these were joined together in the valley of Sidon in the salt sea. Verse 4, let's walk through, sis. 12 years they served Kedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. That is the kings of Sodom and all around. They all rebelled against this king because they were like, the big dogs in our world today that actually have control over our governments. Anybody keeping up with me? Somebody asked me a really important question the other day, and I said, you guys, we need to really learn. Our government doesn't really run anything. They are puppets on a string, controlled by powers and economies way bigger than them. They are prostitutes for products and policies that are global in nature, and you and I are the little pawns on the table. And what Lot did not realize is that he was going into the midst of a major war because he didn't read the fine print. He didn't read the fine print. Lot, you needed to get out 2 years earlier. And so what's happening now, Lot is in the midst of a major war. And this war is going to take out the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and all these other. And guess what the outcome is going to be? Lot is going to be taken into captivity. Look with me over at verse 8. And there went out the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zeboam and the king of Bela, the same as Zor. And they joined battle with them in the valley of Siddim, with Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, with the Tidal, king of nations, and so forth, 4 kings with 5. And the vale, or valley of Sodom, was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. That means their army was routed and wiped out. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they remained fled, and and those that remained fled to the mountains. Here it is. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. See, this is where the dominating kingdoms now come in and confiscate everything. Y'all got that? I bet you Lot didn't get that in his text. I bet you that didn't come up in his tweet. He was reading other data that gave him false graphs about his income always going up. And I've already told you that at every structure of our information system, they have confiscated it and controlled it at the level of lying to you about outcomes. You cannot trust the structure of our economic system. Wall Street is gamed. The medical industry is gamed. The political situation is gamed. Even our ecology today is gamed. You and I are in a Truman story, and you need to know it. This is why so much around our world is collapsing, and your media is talking like nothing's going on. Anybody listening to me? So what bothers me about Christians, too, is how easily we buy into the narrative. We are not willing to be discerning, particularly if the narrative is promising them prosperity. See, that's a Lot mentality. See, listen, Lot chose Sodom because Sodom would be convenient. And the vast majority of people we know are trapped by a mindset of convenience. But convenience will always lead to compromise when you're choosing a process for prosperity rather than the promises of God for destiny. And that's what my boy is right now. He's waking up today realizing that the government, a new government from around the world, another government is coming in and taking everything that you have. I love this. Can y'all put up with me? Let me share something with you. Sometimes the truth hurts. Lot is getting ready to get a wake-up call. Arise, move, and go. And he ain't going to pay no attention to it. Because of the euphoria of the false promise of wealth and benefits. See, Lot now is going to be taken captive politically, but it will be an indication that he was already taken captive psychologically. Am I making some sense? Look at what the text says. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, all the victuals, and went their way. Verse 12, look at it. And they took who? They took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom. Oh, a minute ago he dwelt on the outside. Now he made his citizenship in earth. He went down to City Hall in San Francisco and signed out to hang out with Gavin Newsom. He did. He did. He did. And if it's not Gavin Newsom, it'll be any other society in which we think that we are going there to prosper rather than to do God's will. Any other city on the planet. Anywhere you go in the name of just wanting to prosper in the flesh, you're going to be signing up with the adversary. If God is not putting you in there as an agent of change, if he's not putting you in there because he knows that you are strong in the Lord and in the power of his might, and you're going to be a vehicle for transformation. Because that's what he does do. Don't get me wrong. The whole purpose of putting Israel in the land of Palestine is to be a nation of transformation, to change that whole society. So when God is putting you in the midst of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's because he trusts that you know how to keep your identity, understand your mission, and do God's will. Am I making some sense? Otherwise, they're going to convert you. So this is what we're dealing with. They took Lot, Abram's brother, and he dwelt in Sodom and all of his goods. And so you know what God had to do. He had to go, all right, Abraham, go ahead on. Go get that knucklehead. Go get him. Right? All right, Abraham, go. I know you love him. Go get him. Go get him. And the text tells us Abraham delivered him. Is that true? Certainly he delivered him. Look over at verse 16. And he brought back, this is Abraham, all the goods, and also brought back again his brother who? And his goods, and the women also, and the people. And this is where, if we had time to deal with Abraham, how highly favored Abraham was. Because in destroying these kings that sought to take Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham meets the Lord Jesus Christ in the person of Melchizedek and gets a grand blessing in preparation for taking over the land. Abraham is a big dog. He's sowing to the Spirit again. Is it sowing to the Spirit when you see your brother in captivity and you go and deliver him? Is that sowing to the Spirit? Is that walking in love? Of course it is. See, now Abraham is a model of what we call the warrior angel. Y'all keeping up with me? We are terrestrial angels. We are worshiping angels, warrior angels. We are messenger angels. We are ministering angels. Y'all hear what I'm saying? Now Abraham is a warrior angel as a representative of Christ to deliver his nephew Lot, only to watch Lot crawl right back up into rotten Sodom and Gomorrah again. Right? Okay, so we can move on. We can move on. He sought comfort, and he was trapped by convenience. That's Lot. At the expense of his calling. He sought comfort. He was trapped by convenience at the expense of his calling. In other words, he never won anybody to Christ in Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're about to see him lose everybody in his family. Subpoint C in our outline. Subpoint C in our outline lays this out. The outcome was what? The outcome was tragic. We get to pick that up next week. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 13 through 15 tells us about building on the foundation of the gospel material that cannot handle the fire. This is what Paul said. He was talking to ministers. This applies secondarily to believers in general, but he's talking to ministers. So this one beats me up because it's a warning about sowing to the flesh or building on the foundation of Christ, wood, hay, and stubble. Okay? Listen to what he says. Every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by what? Is Lot's situation going to be revealed by fire? It's going to be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. Verse 14. If any man's works abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. Verse 15. If any man's work shall be what? That means it was not precious, durable metals like silver, bronze, and gold. It had to be combustible material designed to burn as soon as the fire of God's judgment comes upon it. Y'all know that. That's what the text is teaching. Yet he himself shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be what? Yet so as by See, now, are we describing Lot? We are describing Lot, and I was thinking about the last hymn we sung. The last hymn we sung, do you remember it? Jesus, what a friend of what? I said, Lot wrote that song. Do you guys remember the song? Jesus, what a of sinners. And when you read all of those lines, you know who I see? I see Lot. I see Lot. Do you see Lot? Because God came and got him. God came and got him. We're almost there. Lot's a problem for a lot of Christian folks. He's a real problem. Because there's not much to Lot except a bunch of mess. Is that true? Like a lot of people that don't do their Bibles well, that don't know how to actually soundly interpret Scripture, will conclude that Lot couldn't have been saved. Now, how he going to separate from the biggest dog in the Old Testament, Father Abraham, run down and go to the worst city in the nation, Sodom and Gomorrah, get captivated politically, delivered, and go back again? Raise a family in that mess that gets completely diapraxed by the DEI. And when God comes and says it's time to go, he hesitates. Doesn't he? He hesitates. Boy, that's a Christian who is jacked up in his identity, is it not? All right, we got a little bit more work to do. Just a little bit more work to do as we lay this foundation. Under point number one, the basic takeaway is this, that he sought comfort and he was trapped by convenience. And we know our world system is seeking to trap men and women by comfort and convenience. Is that true? That's where you and I are. Point number two, but wrath is coming from where? That's right. Wrong choice making by Lot, but wrath is coming from God. This is Genesis 19:13. This is a conclusio, but we'll be able to look at it again in a few other verses. Genesis 19:13. So before I read that, here's how I want to set you up. Before I read that, this is how I want to set you up. I want to set you up this way. I want to set you up as being like Lot, thinking that you can do God without reading your Bible. Thinking that you can do God without listening to prophetic anointed preaching. I'm talking about preaching that comes from somebody that knows something about the nature and character and will and purpose of God. Somebody who has proven that they stand on the word of God no matter what's going down in your world. Somebody that does not mind telling you something different than the broad road narrative. Somebody that's going to keep it straight with you even though you don't like it. Even though you don't like it. Even though you don't like it. See, like God doesn't care how you feel when it comes to your soul. He knows that we're constantly building idols, blinding us from the reality of what he's up to. Here Lot is hanging out in the city. He's in the gate. That means he's one of the leaders. He's sitting on the cabinet with Newsom. He's sitting on the cabinet. He's in the city, is he not? He's one of the judges in the gate. That means that boy done finagled his way all the way into commerce. This is a Christian. He done finagled his way all into commerce. And I feel really bad for his kids because the education they got was absolutely horrendous. And he hasn't won one person to Christ. Now, if you read into the narrative in a moment, you will learn, although I'm going to deal with it next week, verses 1 through 11, all of the people of Sodom, particularly the people that were in leadership, said, this fella came to hang out with us. He's trying to be a judge over us. Y'all got that? See, in other words, when the pressure came down, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah really never liked Lot. Listen to me, child of God. I don't care how cute you is. I don't care how gifted you are. I don't care how influential you are. I don't care how much money you have. The unsaved don't like you because it's a spiritual battle. They will tolerate you as long as they need to, but as soon as the numbers are on their side, They will let you know we will eat you up and spit you out. And that's because friendship with the world is enmity against God. That's what Lot's about to find out. Is he not? Friendship with the world is enmity against God. Point number 2, wrath is coming from God. And verse 13 tells us in chapter 19 that this is so. Listen to what it says. For we will destroy this place because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to do what? Destroy this place. Now, see, now we're talking about the bubble busting. Let's deal with the bubble busting under 3 subpoints really quickly. Wrath is coming from God. And what do I mean by the bubble busting? I mean that the world system will tell you that there is no God. The world system will tell you that if there is one, he loves everybody unconditionally. That's the world system. And what that means is the God that we project, the God that we conceive, the God that we construct, completely approves of everything that we do. There's nothing that we do that God says, hey, wait a minute, can we talk about that? Remember what the Bible says, come, let us reason together. That's the God of the Bible. But the God of the Bible is also holy and says the wages of sin is, see what I'm getting at? And what God lays out very clearly is that he will not tolerate iniquity forever. And so our subtitle is very clear. Lot, God's knocking on the door. Mercy is knocking on the door, is it not? Is mercy knocking on the door every day of our life right now? Yes, it is. Every day of our life, mercy is knocking at the door. And you and I don't know that the 4 winds of heaven are being held back by the angels of the Lord, according to Revelation chapter 7, until every one of God's elect are sealed. And then the wrath is coming down like a deluge upon humanity, because it has in the past. Now, the world does not believe what I just said. Neither does the church. You can look at the way the church folk act, that they don't believe that the judgment of God is hanging over humanity. You can tell by the way they behave. The Spirit of God in certain portions and aspects of proclamation and preaching is saying to the church, come out of her, my people. Come out of her, lest you be judged with her plagues. Come out of her, my people, lest the plagues of the Babylonian system get you. Did y'all hear what I just stated? Lest the plagues get you too. That's what God warned Israel about. If you go in there and do not represent me, the very diseases of Egypt will come upon you. Yes, indeed. This is where we are today. One of the evidences that what I'm saying is true is that the explicit teaching of God's word for most Christians is hard to receive. It's hard to receive. Wrath is coming from God because sin is what? It's very deceitful. Lot was deceived by sin, wasn't he? Listen to what the writer of James says in James chapter 1:13. Let no man say that when he's tempted, I'm tempted of God. See, I don't think Lot went down to Sodom, got into all that trouble and say, God, why'd you put me in this? I hear Christians do that all the time. Christians will make a choice, get into some trouble, and then say, God, why did you put me in this mess? Have you heard Christians talk like that? Why did you give me this kind of man? Give you this kind of man? What did he come in the mail? What was it? Did he? Why'd you give me this kind of woman? I mean, what, UPS? Right? Choices. This is where you have to get your doctrine of God's sovereignty right. Human responsibility. Every man is accountable for his choices. That's what the text is teaching. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, because God doesn't tempt anybody, neither tempteth thee any man, because he won't be tempted. Verse 12, here it is. 14, I'm sorry. James 1:14 lays it out. But every man is tempted when he is what? Drawn away of his own lust. Is that Lot? And enticed. He had a false vision in front of him. It was a false vision. Lot was caught up in what we call today smart cities. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Half of you don't, because you're reading the wrong data. They're very convenient. They will have everything you need, but you'll be a slave. They're very convenient. They will have everything you need, but you'll be a slave. They're very convenient. They will have everything that you need, but you'll be a slave because you will have been mentally already preconditioned to submit to the parameters of limitation that they're forcing you into. They will be very convenient. You won't need anything, and you'll be happy because you ain't going to own nothing, no way. But you're going to be happy about that because the government's going to promise you everything. It's already happening. This is your pseudo Garden of Eden external image of everything provided for you. But behind it is a policy that is diabolical and perverse. And the citizens are trapped by dark, demonic ideologies. Do you see it? This is where you and I are going. And for many people, they're already there. And the Lord will bring that to pass fairly soon for you and me, so that you know I'm not just running out on some kind of wild conspiracy theory limb. It's right around the corner. This is why we're dealing with all kind of mess going on in our world today at all these levels. It's to keep you distracted from seeing what God is doing. And that's where we are right now. Poor Lot. I wish I had time. I got to move on. But we'll drive down into this more fully next week, because what I wanted you to capture today around the nature of a believer who is predispositioned to carnality is seeing some of the fruits of it. In spite of what we're about to look at, you and I want to go away with two things here. How rotten we can be. How rotten we can be. Even in spite of the infinite mercy of God. That's what I want you to take away. You can go home now. Point number 2. Wrath is coming down because sin is deceitful. We're drawn away by it. Hebrews chapter 3:13. Let me show you why I say that about Lot. Because Hebrews 3:13 tells you and me that we need to be careful. Exhort one another while it is day. You guys see that? Exhort one another while it is day. That's called a remedy, by the way. That's called a remedy. That's what you do when you love your brother and you love your sister. You don't keep silent when you see them drifting down the shore out into the oceans of confusion. You exhort them. You exhort one another. You encourage them to look to Christ, draw near to Jesus, lay hold of eternal life. You exhort. You exhort until they say, I don't want to hear it no more. And then you pray. Am I making some sense? Because Christians don't like to be exhorted today either. Listen carefully. But exhort one another today while it is called today, lest any of you be what? Hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. So listen carefully. When you are immersed in that foolishness out there that comes in every form of the ubiquitous media, social media outlet, it hardens your heart. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 24. He says, because of the deceitfulness of sin, because iniquity will abound, the love of many will wax cold. So like when iniquity is taking place in our world, the heart gets hard. Can I tell you why? Because sin is pleasurable. That's your next point. Do you see it? Sin's pleasurable. All right, if the lights are on with my people, I can keep it real with you. One of the most difficult aspects of the sinful principle for you and me is that it's pleasurable. That's why we fall for it every time. We fall for it every time because it comes with a package of pleasure. It feels good. Am I making some sense? Sin is pleasurable. And this is what God is saying. That what sin has a tendency to do, and I told you guys this on Friday, just like the truth has the capacity to transform you, the lie does too. So some of us are being transformed by lies into sons of the devil. And others of us are being transformed by the truth into the image of Christ. Does that make some sense? And this is what God says in 2 Thessalonians 2:11. You've heard it before, but hear it again. For this cause shall God send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. So what you and I are dealing with in the present societal melee and the conflict that we're having as we're trying to be truth conveyors to people is we're struggling with trying to get information to people, but they got all kind of arguments against what we have to say. They have built a refuge of lies afforded to them by the world system to not hear us. Am I making some sense? And it's a real battle. And see, unless you're really called to that prophetic pressing through, you'll want to give up and quit. You'll want to give up and quit. Abraham didn't quit. Behind the deliverance of this knucklehead child of God is a man that prayed him out. Is that true? I'll pick that up and make that clear tomorrow. Even when God delivers us, he delivers us not because of us, but because of others who believes that God is a merciful God. And so our brother Lot is operating on a strong delusion. He's believing a lie. Verse 12, and here's the reason why: he sowed to the flesh, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had what? Had what? In unrighteousness. Yeah, this is really interesting. All right, so let me get through this point so I can easily talk about the third point, which is a miracle to me. The third point is a miracle to me. But that's how God is. Every day I'm becoming more convinced that God is something else. I am being more convinced that God is something else. Something else. The wrath is coming and sin is pleasurable, and you and I are dealing with the definitive struggle of what our identity should be when it comes to who we are and who God is. And because we always seem to fall prey like our mother Eve did, and fall prey like Lot is doing, and fall prey like Samson did. Samson did, didn't he? He fell prey, he fell asleep, he woke up somebody else, didn't he? We just seem to fall prey. What we have to understand is the pull and power of pleasure. Particularly when you've been seeded by all kinds of secular propaganda that your job is to live for the weekend. Remember that? Living for the weekend. Remember that? Well, that's what people do. That's what people do. That's what people do. They work all week in the superficial, honorable things of a regular daily job in order to kick it on the weekend with the devil. And then if they ain't too drunk, they'll come to church. Such a model of life will make you powerless when it comes to other people being saved. Such a model of life will make you powerless. You will save no one. You will see no one saved. Right. Pastor, we can't save anybody anyway, but God uses his people to save people. I can show you that in the Bible. He that turns a sinner from his way have saved his soul from death. I have become all things to all men, that if by any means I might save some. Am I making some sense now? Right. So like, if we all start walking around talking like God won't use us to save people, we better shut the church down. We better leave the city, because God's judgment has no reason to linger anymore, since nobody believes that God will use them to change somebody's life or turn a sinner from their way. You better leave the city now, because I can tell you it's under judgment. The only reason God is holding back is because there's enough believers in this crazy place willing to tell the truth as it is in Jesus. You better leave this town. See, this is what the angels are coming to tell Lot. It's not. See, okay, let's get on to our point. Lot's thinking everything's cool, and the angels are coming. Right? Lot's thinking that. Is he deceived? Yes. Right. And the angels are coming. I love this. Point number 3. I'm going to show you 4 things. I'm done. 4 things. We have point number 1, wrong choice making by Lot. Point number 2, wrath is coming from God. Point number 3, I like this: wonderful mercy for sinners. We shouldn't be rushing there, but we have to. We shouldn't be rushing there, but we have to. Let me just touch on these 3 points. When God comes to us, he comes to us to confirm the condition of our situation. When God comes to us, he comes to us to confirm the condition of our situation. So Lot's in the gate. Look at verse 1. I'm just going to touch it and keep moving. Lot's in the gate, and Lot is doing what blind Christians who are committed to worldly systems do. He's just operating out of rote daily work. He ain't thinking that the Lord's going to come visit him. Lot hasn't been hearing from the Lord for years. Do you hear me? Now, Uncle Abraham, him and God talks all the time. I told you this is a parenthetical. We're in the chapter 19, chapter 18. God's got fellowship with the triune God. Abraham's got fellowship with the triune God. The triune God is telling Abraham what he's about to do next year and giving Sarah a child. And he's doing it intimately. They're breaking bread. They're fellowshipping. And God said plainly, shall I not tell Abraham what I'm up to, since I know Abraham is going to do exactly what I tell him about raising his kids right? Of course I'm going to tell Abraham. Plus, I'm getting ready to destroy that city where his nephew is. God is good. Is God good or what? And so Abraham is wrestling with God because God's doing two things. He's promising life and promising death. Sarah getting ready to have Isaac. And see, this is the parenthetical, because once Isaac is born, we're done with Lot. You ain't going to ever hear from Lot again on this side. Are y'all hearing me? This is called a parenthetical. This is not about Lot. This is about Abraham. Lot's just a little blip on the scale to tell you and me you can be saved, but if you sow to the flesh, you're going to lose everything. So what we're looking at is verse 1, and there came two angels to Sodom at evening. Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed down himself with his face toward the ground. He did not know they were angels. I'll pick that up next week because I'm going to unpack it. He's just being nice, culturally nice. Also, he's concerned because there's a little evening time now. See, the smart city he lives in the daytime, the lights are on. At nighttime, the vampires come out. See, this is called hypocrisy. You can play church in the daytime, but at the night, your fangs come out. So here come these two brothers, and Lot's going, man, I better hurry up and apprehend these brothers and sequester them, right? Look at it. And he said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night in my house, and wash your feet, and you shall rise early in the morning, and go on your way. Hey, come on in. Let's shut the door. Let's feed you. Oh, by the way, about 5 o'clock in the morning, as soon as the sun rises up, y'all better get on out of here. Did Lot know something? See, the Christian can become mal-conditioned, maladjusted to perversion, maladjusted to it. And see, but now when another Christian comes, because these angels represent believers, don't they? So when the believer comes and he's full of the Holy Ghost and the believer's coming on a mission-oriented presence, now God is big, the lights are on. Wherever God shows up, the lights are on. Now the Christian that's been walking in all that darkness is fidgety and edgy. We want to get those Christians inside. Come on in. Because it's dark out there. You see how jacked up he is in his head? Do you see how jacked up he is in his head? Because he's walking in the deception of weakness. I told you this on Friday. When fear grips you, you will become a coward. Didn't I tell y'all that? When fear grips you, you will become a coward. And what Lot is doing now is showing himself to be a coward. Why? These are servants of the Most High God. Do you know nothing is going to harm these men at all? But they're going to play out on Lot's diminished cowardlessness because they're there for Lot. Am I making some sense? There's just one more verse there. Let me move on. Notice what it says in verse 3. It says, and he pressed upon them greatly. He pressed upon them greatly. And they turned into him and entered into his house. And he made them a feast and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round about, old, young, everyone from everywhere. Lot knew that was going to happen. He knew that was going to happen. We'll come back to next week and deal with Lot's failed attempt to intervene for them. But the angels intervened for him. Now I want you to see what subpoint number 2 says. Not only does God come to us to confirm, and that's the presence of the truth and the witness of the word. When you get real Christians who are prioritizing the cause of the gospel, when you're walking carnally and they're walking spiritually, there's going to be a conflict between you and that Christian. Does that make some sense? Like if you're walking in the anointing and you're walking maturely and your focus is clear and your Christian brother or sister is walking in the horizontal dimension, there's not going to be fellowship with you and them. Because their mind is corrupted by the subtlety of Satan to buy into priorities that don't square with God's will. How can two walk together except they be agreed? And see, when we're proud, we don't even want to negotiate the possibility that we're out of the way. And this is where Christians actually spend more time with worldlings than they do with true believers. Yes. Subpoint B, God communicates his purpose, doesn't he? I love this. Let's go at verse 12 quickly. Look at verse 12. And the men said unto Lot, do you have anybody here besides son-in-laws and your sons and your daughters? Whatever you got in this city, bring them out of this place because we're getting ready to destroy this place. Now that's clarity, isn't it? I told you Lot was walking around in a strong delusion. He had plans for years, and God says it's over with today. So you know he wasn't walking in the light of God's word. He did not believe in the imminency of God's judgment because you and I are in a situation every day where God has a right to judge. God doesn't have to wait on anything, does he? No. The only reason God is waiting is to bring his people into a place a preparation for his coming. All right, let me continue so we can wrap this up. God calls us to mimic him. Do you see it? So when God gives us his purpose and it struck Lot, whoa, man, I was wrong. These brothers didn't come in and preach to me the eschatological reality that judgment day is going to happen in the moment. Let me get to preaching. See what he's doing now? And a lot of people do that when you teach eschatology around here. We know that for years. Eschatology will get people on the warpath for telling people the world's going in, the world's going in, the world's going in. You can fill your churches up with folks that want to walk around teaching eschatology, especially when they have timelines. Am I making some sense? And so now Lot's going to go to all these family members. Please pull up that text there so we can get through this. Only got 1 or 2 more points. It's saying over in verse 14, and Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-laws, which married his daughters, and said, get up, get up. Now he's telling them, arise, moving. When he should have arose, moved, and went long time ago. For the Lord will destroy this city, but he seemed as one that mocked unto his son-in-laws. This is what I meant by sowing to the flesh. So he had them all these years. And now he's preaching straight gospel and the truth, and it's foreign to them because he's not consistent. Am I making some sense? When you're not consistent, why should anybody listen to you when you're not consistent? Particularly your family. A man is not honored in his own household already. Already a man is not honored in his own household. How much more so when you don't walk in the truth? So Lot is fit to be tied. But the angels, when coming into the presence, should move us to act like them if we're children of God. And here it is. This is where I'm going to close. But God compels us to arrive, move, and go. Would you agree with that? Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, up, get ye out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters. See, now you guys understand. There were 2 daughters that were married. The 2 daughters that Lot was going to give in an incestuous relationship with these folks from Sodom were virgins. So now listen to it. And we'll come back and talk about, again, evil communication corrupts good manners. Lot's head is jacked up. We'll deal with that next week because of where we are in our culture. I'm going to be much more prophetic around Lot and Sodom all being a picture of the apostate church. It's a lot there that has to be seen. It says in verse 16, and while he what? Lingered. The men, that is the angels, laid hold upon his hand, upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters. The Lord being merciful unto him. See, this is why we say salvation is not by the works of our flesh. This is why we say, but for God's mercy in Christ. This is why we say God saved us, not by works of righteousness which we have done, but by his mercy, by his mercy, by his mercy alone. And that mercy has enough power to grab you by the hand. Now we're talking about touched by an angel. Grab you by the hand and drag you out of your dark situation because he chose you in Christ to bring you out. And that's how every one of us have been and will be saved. God has to deliver us from ourselves. He has to deliver us from the world. He has to deliver us from the rotten delusions that we operate in. I'm so glad that grace is more powerful than my sin. I'm so glad that the grace of God is able to disregard, because of the death of Christ, my absolute ignorance and rebellion against him. I'm so glad God is stronger than my sin. Grace greater than all my sin. Wonderful, merciful Savior. Wonderful, merciful Savior. Wonderful, merciful Savior. Lot chose the flesh, but God in Christ still chose Lot. This is a sinner's gospel. This is the only way it makes sense. The only way it makes sense is that God is rescuing a man who does not deserve to be rescued. Amen.